This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.
Sometimes I deal with numbers, and if you want to count me out.
That is a very strange and interesting song called Red Telephone from a strange and interesting band called Love, hailing from the year of our Lord, 1967. Clearly, they are facing some kind of existential crisis, as was a thing at that time too. And I thought it was the perfect opener for our show today, because today we are talking about a new kind of existential crisis that I know many of you are facing right now, related to what you are doing when it comes to your job. People are dropping out like flies all over the place for good reason, and it is an amazing opportunity to do something radically new and different in your life and to guide you through this really uniquely auspicious and profitable moment in time. I have recruited my colleague, Dr. Lisa Severi, to join us again today to share her advice and wisdom on how you can seize this zeitgeist and use it to your advantage and fulfillment. On this episode of the podcast, we are talking about the Great Resignation and, more importantly, what it means for you and how to use this moment as an opportunity to maybe reevaluate what you have been doing in your own career and talk about where you might want to go next. So to join me in this conversation, once again, I'm visiting with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Severi. Dr. Lisa is an expert career counselor. She's a past president of the National Career Development Association and a past president of the Colorado Career Development Association. She was the director of career services at the University of Colorado, Boulder. She is the author of numerous book chapters on the subject of career counseling. And today she's here to share her wisdom with you to understand what is going on in the world around us as it relates to career. And I think both of our goals for today's conversation is for you to listen to this episode and hopefully leave it with some new ideas and at least even new questions to be asking yourself to help you get clarity on what you really want to be doing with your career and by extension, your life. So, Dr. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Oh, well, I really appreciate your time. And I have to tell you, I got so much wonderful feedback from the last podcast that you and I recorded together a while ago on your thoughts about how to use narrative techniques to get clarity around starting a new chapter. That was just so helpful to many of my listeners. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I've heard from a lot of people about that as well. So that's always wonderful to get that feedback.
Well, you have a lot of great wisdom to share. So what I invited you back, of course, to talk about today, as you know, there's so much in the news lately, this idea about the Great Resignation, they're calling it, which is, people leaving their jobs in pursuit of, we hope, something better, something more meaningful, which it's like a reshuffling of the deck. There are people leaving positions, but also a lot of people coming into new ones, just, as an extension of that. And first of all, as a career counselor, you're sitting with people day in, day out as they're sort of grappling with these big, like, what do I do with my life kinds of questions. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting. The word I use most often with clients is the job market's just really weird right now.
The clinical definition, it's weird.
Exactly. I should probably come up with something much more wise with that.
But seriously, in all seriousness, you've been a career counselor for a long time. How is this weird or different than historically what you have experienced?
Yeah. So just as a marker, if you will, I'm very curious to see what the total 2021 numbers are. They're not quite out yet from the Department of Labor. Mm-hmm. But in November, 4.5 million workers quit their job. 1 million of those were in leisure and hospitality. So, your quintessential customer service roles. That's 3% of the whole workforce. So, I mean, in terms of, turnover and why, of course, recruiters and other folks who hire are going kind of nuts, 3% of the entire workforce. That's just amazing. So assuming that the trend continued into December, those are records.
I mean, forgive me, I'm so ignorant here. Like, I don't even have a frame of reference. Is that like, what's typical?
That's a really good question. In terms of turnover,
you don't actually have to cite statistics, but it's significantly more than,
absolutely. Because unemployment tends to hang around 5 to 6%. And depending on where you are in the country, that may vary greatly. But so 3% of the whole workforce turning over is just amazing. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if you're the same, but just anecdotally, walking around or trying to order things online or trying to go to your restaurant that's closed or changed hours, like nobody has the help that they need right now. It is an interesting piece. And I think a huge part of that, I was reading a survey that Indeed did of, the workers that take part in their, social media / professional website with job seekers. And they did one back in March, and 92% of the respondents said the pandemic made them feel life is too short to stay in a job they weren't passionate about. So to me, that was huge because oftentimes, like I can remember when you were talking about sort of historically, where does this fit? I remember back in 2005, 2006, and I was working at the university at the time, and that was when the recession hit and people were having a very difficult time finding jobs. And the first thing that every article said was, if you're unemployed, contact your alma mater. And being at an alma mater, none of us were prepared for that. For the most part, we didn't work with alums. So that was a huge shift in terms of, helping people to find jobs. But it was nothing like this, which is not just about, a high level of unemployment or, inflation and those kind of pieces. To me, there's been a shift in terms of not only am I going to give you my time, but I may be sacrificing my safety. There may be other things that are going on like childcare that's really hard. And so people have, I think that quote is really key in terms of, I have to really want to do this or I'm not going to, which was, I think, very rare before and is becoming more and more common.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my big takeaways from our last conversation is your observations about this like trend towards empowerment, that people do feel this greater sense of agency and choice. And I think this idea that is really coming back into the collective consciousness that our careers are, not to, and I don't mean this in a hyperbolic way, but like truly are our life's work in many ways. And I know some people have careers that are, supporting other aspects of their life. They are actually just earning a paycheck so that they can, do what is meaningful in other parts of their life. But I think for a lot of people, and I'm included in this, it's like, it is our life's work. And to find that meaning and passion and value in that, do you feel like that is a newer thing in the sense that people almost have permission to do this in a way that they didn't before? Or is it because of that introspective period from the pandemic? I mean,
yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's a combination, of course, of a lot of different things that are all happening concurrently. But I do think that underlying piece of, at this point, it has to be more. It has to be more than a paycheck. Especially as people have become creative about how they do income, how they earn income and those kind of pieces, that they don't necessarily have to settle anymore. So why are they going to? In our culture especially, but I think it's true in a lot of places, work is the way we connect with the world. I mean, we even talk about it as that work-life balance, as if those are two very separate, very different things. And the pandemic that sent everybody home, and the estimate is about half of us then worked from home, and about half of the careers out there are not careers you can do from home. So that shifted. Be very interesting to see how it's going to shift back if and when we return to some different, people say return to normal. I'm not sure normal is really the goal, but whatever sort of it looks like moving forward, and to see what that looks like. And again, that if we do have this sort of stronger mingling of home and work that the pandemic has brought about, what is that going to look like moving forward? And how do we build in those things that we're passionate about and where that comes from? So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of that, we got to a place, and it seems like natural progression, right? But we got to a place where work really consumed us and was kind of unbalanced in terms of the role it took in our lives.
Glorified even in the culture,
absolutely.
Really. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then when other things came up, people are worried about getting COVID, of course, especially before vaccines. But even now, that's not a universal thing that people do. So it stays with us. Childcare is nuts. I don't have kids. I know you do. That's a piece that it's crazy. And so when paying for childcare became more expensive than what you were able to earn, that was crazy. Of course, then, that left. And that's still a challenge. I think that the competition for workers, as I said, if you go to restaurants now and you have to wait, there's open tables, but they don't have enough servers, that people are leaving because people feel confident that they're going to be able to find something better now. I mean, it's all out there in the news. Everybody's leaving their jobs. So, well, if I think my job is pretty bad, I'm pretty sure I can find a better one. And geez, if you don't pay well and you don't have good working conditions, people are out of there. Which I see as a silver lining in terms of outcomes from this particular job market, that, it's equalizing salaries and working conditions, especially in low wage working opportunities. And that's fabulous. I really hope that sticks with us.
Yeah, that would be such a positive thing. But it's interesting, like what you were saying too. It's like that people are leaving, but I think for many people who aren't in low wage situations, who are just seeking better opportunities, like there are also a lot of people who are leaving jobs in search of meaning, in search of that passion. Can you say more in your experience? Like if somebody is listening to this and has been feeling like their chosen career has been lacking in that meaning, that passion. In your experience, where do people find meaning in their work, passion in their work? I mean, what is it about work? I guess what I'm asking is it certain kinds of jobs or careers or industries that are more meaningful than others? Or is it sometimes a mindset that helps create meaning in the work that you do? Where does that sense of meaning come from in your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say in terms of the clients that I've worked with, some have had that experience of having a job. And it's interesting because oftentimes it was early on in their career and it wasn't a particularly prestigious position or a big title or a huge paycheck, but they had that sense of flow. When you're in a job and you're kind of moving between tasks and you feel that sense of expertness, I actually know what I'm doing. I can do this, and that passion then comes from that. Or they're working for a particular cause that they're passionate about. I always think of that with me. I feel so lucky to be able to do this work because I love hearing people's stories. And if I can be helpful in some way in that time, it just feels so good. And you're completely in that flow. If a client has had that experience, then we can kind of unpack all that and figure out where it came from. Like, if you're not experiencing that now, why? Like, what's happened in the meantime? And, life kind of happens and there's career trauma and there's great supervisors and there's bad supervisors. And, sometimes you can promote yourself right out of being happy, right? And find yourself in a position where, you're a little bit trapped. The money's good, the title's good, the prestige is good. And yet, you're not doing the things that you really enjoy doing. So that's one set, is sort of recreate the environment in which that happened. For some people, they've never felt that. Work has always been a struggle. They've never felt that kind of passion. So then, I think of it kind of as a blank slate. Like, let's go back to the beginning. And if it hasn't been work, find other examples of when you've had that experience in your life and what you can bring forward. And I do think that this wacky time period in our collective history of the pandemic has, as you said, given people permission to say, you know what, I don't like this at all. Whether it's a refocus on, I want to bring something to the world. I want it to be meaningful, the work that I've done, instead of just moving things from one side to another. I really want to build something. Whatever the case may be, I do think that it's been a time of great reflection, and people have really thought about, all right, I'm giving this my time and potentially my health exposure and my family and all of those pieces. It's got to be worth it. And so again, I feel like that's kind of a silver lining of the time period, because, people are kind of, they're stressed up to here. So, if there's something that they can do to make a change, to really bleed into all of those other pieces of their life, that they're taking the time to do that. And I think it's a wonderful, again, weird outcome of this time period.
Well, yeah, weird, but maybe understandable, because as we're talking, I'm thinking right now this idea of post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're familiar with that. That might be more of a psychology term than a career term. But this, thing that we see oftentimes is, we think of post-traumatic trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, that something bad happens or scary happens, and that it's like never the same. And actually, the more of the truth is that when people do live through really hard, awful things, there's often a lot of like growth and personal reflection and like making contact with core values and sort of a reset of priorities, that on the other side of those traumatic life experiences, there's an enormous amount of growth and positive change, and that sometimes never would have happened had that person not gone through that. And I was just sort of thinking the same thing, like that kind of collective trauma of the, like, especially when it was really intense, like shutdowns, people are looking at this existential, like, am I going to die if I leave the house without a mask on? Like that whole thing, and just how reflective that makes you. And the connection that I'm hearing you say to that meaning and happiness in work, that sometimes it can come from mastery, like feeling just really good, like you're surfing on top of the wave and just like know exactly what to do in that flow experience. But that the other piece of meaning that you talked about was very much attached to that like core personal value. Like for you were saying it's around that helping value. For others, it might be the building value. I've talked to so many creative people, and for many of them, it's just the opportunity to create things, to have ideas and sort of actualize them. That the act of creation is very meaningful. And that's what I'm hearing you say, is that to either figure out what that is based on your historical experiences, or if it is a blank slate, try to find that basic value, that pillar of meaning, that then you can start to design a career around what would allow you to be helpful, what would allow you to build something, what would allow you to create. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, to me, the narrative work fits so well, because it is designed around identifying what those themes are. And I think this time period, in addition to the fact that people just did have more time on their hands because we weren't supposed to do things, especially in big groups and those types of things. But also, again, that sense of reflection, I really do think that sort of theme around, we all now feel like life is short. And that before, we kind of had become, some of us, complacent about what that looks like. Yeah, I really don't like my job. I'm playing the lottery most weeks. I'm trying to find something new. but it's fine. It pays the bills. We kind of do get stuck in that. And this whole period of time has been a major shakeup of those kind of things. Like, do I even like what I'm doing anymore? Do I like the people that I work with? Am I feeling positive? I think about, is it kind of, most jobs are stressful, but is it the type of stress that you actually want to engage in and find a challenge and is sort of thrilling stress versus the, I don't want to get up this morning. I feel a little nauseous Sunday nights because I don't want to go to work on Monday. And so, if it's given us permission in a way to kind of step back and say, again, life is short. I want to enjoy what it is that I'm doing. And for a lot of people, that's been retirement, which has been sort of interesting too. Like, I want to do it on my own terms. I'm not so sure I can do it through work. I'll do it through volunteering or when we are allowed to again, traveling, those types of pieces. But to me, it's not worth it anymore. So if my plan was to retire in 10 years, hey, maybe I do that now. So I think it's not only the Great Resignation, not only people moving from job to job, but I think there's some that are like, you know what, I think I'm good. I'm out, and so that's been interesting too.
Yeah. That is interesting that it isn't always people leaving one situation and moving into another, but really just sort of questioning the idea of working for compensation entirely, that I'm going to expend my energy doing things that just are because I want to do them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's been some change as well, which is a little bit different. We haven't quite touched on it yet, but there are certainly patterns in terms of where people are leaving as well. I mean, I mentioned leisure and hospitality, certainly the customer service angle. And, for some people, there are a lot of really kind-hearted and generous people out there, who started tipping 3 times as much as they had before and, really recognize there are other people who have taken their own personal stress out on other people. And I think in leisure and hospitality, that's been a big piece. But also, obviously, with people traveling less frequently and, those types of issues, there's also been downsizing in those fields as well. But some of the other ones like healthcare and teaching, I mean, I really can't. I have a number of teachers that I'm working with right now. Their lives have just been nuts over the last few years, totally changing the way that they teach from in-person to online, managing what that looks like, kids, seeing directly into kids' homes and what that looks like, and just the level of change and again, putting their own health and safety at risk. And, that piece, that used to be a great sense of accomplishment for them and sense of purpose and meaning. And now is just the frustration has overwhelmed all of that. So I think, again, in healthcare and teaching and then hospitality and customer service, there are also folks that are like, I've done what I can do, but I can't take it anymore. And I'm ready to move on to whatever is next. It's been interesting to hear people's stories. Talk about your career trauma. For a lot of people, that's been really difficult.
Well, let's, because that was something in the last podcast that we sort of touched on and didn't really have time to fully explore, but that the idea of career trauma is so real. And I think it doesn't get enough acknowledgement or like airtime just in the general zeitgeist, but like when you were just talking about people in the healthcare professions or educators, there's the work itself, but they're also like, in some ways, battling these very large systems that are in place around, certainly public education or like large hospital systems. And I'm curious to know, like when you talk to people who are really coming out of positions or careers that were traumatizing for them, is that sort of a pattern in what you see? Are there big, like, systems, or is it more really toxic relationships with like leaders or supervisors? What have you noticed with that over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer is both. I mean, certainly, absolutely. Now, you can hear the systemic pieces. I've talked to people who actually are on the East Coast. And so they're in a position where they can work in, say, 3 different states, depending on, where they live versus where, and they'll change versus because of the leadership in that state. They'll look for a job in another because the system is so different. The Department of Education, even just the governor's office, it looks really different. And from everything from mask mandates to vaccines and everything else. So the systemic stuff absolutely is a problem for folks. And how that looks like, what it looks like, how it plays out is very interesting. There's also, as you mentioned, the relationship piece. I hear all the time people being basically bullied at work by supervisors and peers. And there's a power dynamic there, as there is in systems too, of course. But individually, a power dynamic where, something's going on. And there can be a bazillion underlying reasons, bosses who feel threatened, bosses who really are incompetent. They take that out on their supervisees. Like there's a lot, and just people who are naturally, bullies. And there's still not a whole lot people can do about it. There are more and more systems put in place for sexual harassment, which is great. Still, I think not necessarily all that helpful. If you're in a bad situation where you're going to work every day and, somebody usually not literally, but, is beating you down, like that's something you need to get out of. And absolutely there are parallels with relationship work, friendships, families, partners, like all of the above. So sometimes there's some things that you can try to help it be better, but oftentimes it's just leaving, that you can get HR involved in those sorts of things. But oftentimes that ends up making a situation, maybe it helps improve the system a little bit. We'll cross our fingers and hope that that's true. But the situation by then is so uncomfortable that they're really the only way you can handle it is to move to something better. It's balancing that out. I always kind of tread lightly in terms of that because I want to help someone fight the fight if that's what they want to do. Absolutely. How can I support you in doing that? And also support people who are like, I just got to get out of here. Fine, let's do that. And sometimes that's parallel work. But I think, if you've got someone with a little bit of work experience and ask them about, what has been your best situation at work? What has been the worst? And everybody has horror stories about people they've worked with or systems they've worked in, exactly as you said, supervisors that have been terrible. Everybody has stories. And so just like as in any other kind of trauma, how you integrate that into your story moving forward is so important. Does that become energy for moving forward? Does it make you a better supervisor because you now know what not to do in terms of your own clients? How can you build on that and integrate it in so that it's not dragging on you moving forward, but becomes part of your growth? Exactly as you said, it's an interesting challenge, but most people, I think, get excited about that idea. Hold on, this doesn't necessarily just need to be baggage I carry with me for the rest of my life, but I can find a place for it, learn from it if I can, and then move on without it. I think ultimately that's the goal. But certainly, yeah. Oh my gosh, just reading the news about stories over the last few years of, again, you can read great stories about the wonderful things that happened and just awful stories, especially in healthcare and teaching and, customer service and all kinds of areas.
Let me ask you this though. Because I don't specialize in career work the same way that you do. And though, because I think careers are such a large part of everybody's life, I do often, when I'm working with my private clients, we do talk about sometimes the things that they're experiencing in their jobs. And oftentimes it is, I like what I'm doing, but there's this supervisor, right, who has unreasonable expectations or, like you say, beating people down, a lot of negativity, even like aggression, not physical aggression, but like that sort of emotional aggression. And it can be hard to change jobs. it's not a easy thing to do. And sometimes it's not as black and white. People might have other reasons for wanting to stay and work it out, like in a relationship. So I guess I'm curious to know, have you ever seen it get better for people who are in, a situation where they have a aggressive weirdo supervisor and they have been able to either do something or have a courageous conversation or affect positive change so that it gets better? Or are you always with people like, just pull the ripcord, just get out of there? What do you see with that?
I'll just to be real, it is rare. If you have that situation.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's rare. I think people stick around for a number of different reasons. Again, not unlike many relationships. I mean, one, you can look at somebody's history, especially within a company, and it could be they'll move along. So sometimes people stay because they're sort of waiting it out. And especially if it's a supervisor who's kind of bounced around to different areas. So, that is a strategy that people have to kind of wait.
Last man standing, last woman standing.
And some of that, again, is values-based, right? Because I think a lot of people are incredibly dedicated to their jobs, their clients, their coworkers, the actual content of the work that's being done. I think there's a sense, and I totally get this, of, I don't want to let all those people down because of this jackass, but at the same time, I do think that it's worth having a conversation because generally it doesn't really make it worse. Of just sharing with a supervisor, and I've practiced this with clients quite a bit, of how to have that conversation. Like not from a place of you need to change, but I can tell you I will be more productive and would thrive if we could talk about this, or if you could share feedback this way, or, whatever the conduct is, to kind of take it into a place. So like, for example, someone who, calls you out in a meeting for something that you've done and chastises you in public in front of other people and those kind of things, to be able to talk about that. Like that, I've had experience that in the past, and I can tell you it is not helpful. So, having that conversation and sort of thinking about it, sometimes it works. Sometimes it works for a period of time and then oftentimes goes back, but then you can remind people. If it's a small organization and someone knows the supervisor, or there's actually a process in HR for making a complaint, that is a strategy as well. At least it goes on the record so that, if you do end up leaving, but 3 coworkers down the line, HR finally sees a pattern. So that may be helpful, but generally it makes the person more angry because they feel like you've gone around behind their back. So I do think the best strategy is to go, but to somehow provide that feedback at some point, even if it's in an exit interview of, I love everything about this organization or this company, but I'm leaving because of this person.
Kevin.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know people don't like to burn bridges and all of those kind of pieces. But again, patterns are important. And, if nobody's saying anything, it could be everybody's having the same experience with Kevin, but nobody's saying anything. And that's kind of a problem too.
Well, and a growth opportunity, because I think too, many people in leadership positions, they are very focused on the work itself and pressure that is coming maybe from higher ups on them. And really, like in my experience, do not have a ton of awareness about how they are making other people feel. And so I think that's why, especially in our practice here in Growing Self over the years, we've started doing so much emotional intelligence coaching for leaders and managers, because, Kevin shows up and is like, I've had 4 people leave and they're telling, this is the feedback and I don't even know what they're talking about. So can you help me with this? I'm like, yes. And we can kind of dig it. And it turns into a very positive, growth experience, maybe not for the people who leave, but, the people who come after, because I think a lot of leaders and managers do really have personal growth work to do. And they don't, unless somebody says something, they really legitimately do not know. that it's a
Yeah,
problem.
I absolutely agree, because I think that's huge. I mean, obviously some people are just jerks, and they've gotten, whether they're maybe they're content experts, I don't know, but they, continue. The other thing is that unfortunately there's this weird thing, as you were talking about systems, where, one way to get rid of someone without firing them is to promote them or move them to another place.
Oh,
and so
I never
you
thought
do
about
have this.
that.
Oh my goodness, it's definitely in higher ed, it's an issue. And so, I can solve my own problem by moving Kevin elsewhere, but he gets promoted and now he's supervising other people. And so it looks like he's phenomenal because he's had all these promotional opportunities when really it's just people trying to get rid of him. I think that happens in systems all the time. Kind of wary about this. Are you that good? Or are you getting shuffled?
Oh.
So that it's an interesting thing. And again, there's nothing that a subordinate can do about that. It's got to come from the system, or, from that person recognizing, or somebody's supervisor recognizing that they really need to do some work. I agree. I think, not everybody, of course, but most people are open to that in terms of that work, because sometimes, they're given feedback and they're like, what? What do you mean bully? I'm not a bully. I'm not a bully. I'm like, let me outline your behavior. And so it's an interesting process, but it's just so hard to be in that position where that's happening to you. And, there's not a whole lot you can do to make the situation better. You really just need to, take what amazing things that you have to offer and find someone who can appreciate them.
Well, I agree with you. And maybe you could speak to this piece of this. I think it takes a fair amount of confidence and connection with your own self-worth to say, I am going to take all my gifts and things that I've learned and, take this to somebody who will appreciate me. Because in my experience, sometimes, especially for people who tend to struggle a little bit with depression or anxiety anyway, will just being in a toxic romantic relationship or with a parent or a friend, when they do live through a toxic occupational relationship with a Kevin, they come out the other side feeling like they've done something wrong, or if I were better, if I was more talented, if I were a better communicator, I could have made it work with Kevin. It damages their self-esteem. It makes them doubt themselves. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I like the coaching mode so much, because, when people think about career stuff, they think about sort of strategy and job titles and resumes and interviewing and all of those kind of concrete pieces. But so many people that I work for, I look at their credentials and think, oh my God, this is fantastic. You have such a unique set of skills. And what people see instead is, okay, but I don't match the criteria, that somebody's posted as preferred qualifications. And I think that's because they don't know that you're out there, so that there's so many pieces that are about that. But when you add in, and so I do focus a lot on self-esteem and getting rid of the recurring messages of self-doubt. I'll never get this job. I'm not good enough. Absolutely. If you never apply, you're never going to get that job. You're right. That's the way that it works. But I do think that tie of the anxiety and depression, that of really unpacking a little bit, how much of that is tied to the current work situation versus I struggle with that in every aspect of my life. And this is how it's showing up at work. And that those things are really difficult to untie. But it's so important to focus on because, if you're having that horrible, toxic environment at work, you're going to bring that home. I mean, again, right now, half the people are working from home. So you're in it, in your own house, right? And it's impacting your other relationships, your relationships with your kids, all of that. Who has energy when they're having all of their energy sucked by a work situation? So figuring out kind of where all of those pieces come from and how to best address it. Is it really situational and contextual and being caused by this work problem, or is it something underlying that I need really some help in working through more consistently? Because it's showing up everywhere. It's showing up at work, it's showing up at home, and it's really become for me kind of a systemic thing that I really then need to go a little bit deeper and figure out kind of the core of those. And hopefully, high tide raises all boats, right? And all of those situations then get a little bit better.
I hear what you're saying. And so it sounds like it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, that there are some situations, like if you're in a toxic relationship with your boss, Kevin, and it is making you feel bad. It is making you feel bad about yourself. It's making you question yourself. You're saying that one strategy is to kind of look at the context, and that can be a way to recenter yourself if you're able to say, actually, it's really specific to this relationship. I didn't feel this way about myself until I started working here, and being able to identify the source of that is a way to understand these feelings are coming from these external circumstances and maybe not a sweeping statement about your self-worth, right? So that could be one point of strength. But then the other thing that I'm hearing you say is that if there are predispositions to things like anxiety and depression, and I think, this is probably worth saying out loud, because I think that maybe many people don't really understand that the way that we feel changes the way that we think and the way that we perceive things. And because I think that it's very easy for we humans to sort of make a causal, well, this thing happened, so therefore I feel bad. Whereas what's true with depression and anxiety, you feel down or you feel scared, and therefore you find reasons to support that feeling. So it's kind of like that internal versus external piece. So what you're saying, Dr. Lisa, is that if it's more like a global thing and you feel this way in many areas of your life, that would be an indication that maybe it is actually depression or anxiety. And instead of trying to jump out of a job or break up with your boss or something, that maybe the more valuable work would be to manage those feelings and then see how you feel about your job once you're in a better place overall. Is
yes.
that
Yep.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And sometimes that healing process is impossible in a current situation. So then it's a matter of resources, right?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm thinking if you're in a really toxic work environment, even if it is more global struggles with anxiety and depression that you're dealing with, you still may need to get out. If it's kind of an emergency situation, like it's pulling me down to the point where, I may be thinking about hurting myself or any of those kind of pieces. Like you have to, figure out the resources that you need to actually just leave, as you would in any kind of toxic relationship. I often ask people, when just in the course of conversation, somebody says something that's fairly negative about themselves, or their credentials for a job or any of that kind of piece. I ask people, all right, whose voice was that? Because that, whatever that statement was, I'm not good enough, I can't do my job, like those kind of pieces. And oftentimes it is the boss. Like, well, Kevin tells me that every day. Like, then
Kevin's in your head.
Set up camp in there, and that's, part of that, as you said, like that sense of empowerment is you need to stop listening to Kevin. Like it's been long enough. And who knows where those voices come from. If you've been in job searches before, there's a whole lot of rejection that goes along with that, right? Everybody's talking about how great the job market is right now, how people are desperate for employees, but you could still send out hundreds of applications and never hear a thing, or, a lot of rejection. So you have to kind of power through some of those things. But thinking about, certain messages that now you've internalized of how to shut those off, and they could be, your fifth grade English teacher who told you couldn't write, or, those voices come from so many places. And unfortunately, not all of them are positive. So interrupting that pattern can be really helpful. So that self-doubt, oh no, they're not going to want me. Wait a second, whose voice is that? Is it yours? Is it your depression? Your anxiety working against you? if you want positive things to happen, you need to be proactive about them. But you also need to think about, you just reinforced that message. It was planted by somebody else, but you're now repeating it. So how can we interrupt that process? Yeah, is a huge part of the job search process. I find that a lot of people who, make an appointment with me and they don't really know what they want to do. But when you start having a conversation, they know exactly what they want to do, but they don't have the confidence or the logistical understanding, or there's some obstacle that's standing in their way. So that's kind of an interesting process. Like, it sounds like you kind of do. The question is why, how to make it happen, and let's go from there. And those, that can be really fun too. But how many of us are our own worst enemies when it comes to those sorts of thoughts? It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's the hard part, isn't it?
When I was working as a recruiter, my favorite question to ask people is, if it's somebody who has, various workers, what would your last supervisor say about you? Because it asks people to sort of put their own, like, I'm not supposed to talk about myself, and really think from a lens of other people. And it's sad that somehow, we can advocate better for ourselves in the third person. But it was a question that kind of got at that for people. People, they can rely on me. I'm always on time and all of those things. If you were to say that right off the bat, it would feel uncomfortable. But when I'm, thinking about what would Anne say about me, somehow that's an easier question. So working through some of those pieces to help people be strong advocates for themselves, the way they would with anybody else, and do that for themselves. It's amazing to me how hard that is.
What a wonderful idea, though. Just an easy, almost a hack to build up your confidence around, especially career stuff, especially if you have been feeling a little low lately. What would Anne say about you? So just to kind of reconnect with that. Because yes, so many opportunities right now for people because of the Great Resignation and all the spaces it's opened up. But I think my main takeaway from our conversation is that also requires not just clarity about what you want, what is meaningful for you, but also that confidence piece that there are other opportunities for you and you are worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that worth and deserving. And it's interesting to kind of unpack what those obstacles are. And some of them are new, like, I haven't gotten out of my yoga pants in 3 weeks. How am I going to get in my suit for an interview? Those types of pieces are just funny and really particular to the pandemic. But I had a client that talked to me after one of their interviews, and they said, at first it was really awkward and hard. And then all of a sudden it was kind of like, hey, I do know what I'm talking about. I am good at this. So how do we get that sense back into people, especially if they've had a lot of shuffling around in the last couple of years or have been fairly disconnected because of unemployment or, work structure and what that looks like. And the interviewing process is such a social process of how to get people kind of up and ready for that again. And embracing that piece of they're lucky to have me. I hope this interview goes well because I can really make a difference for that organization. Like we want everybody going into their interviews and life in general, but specifically interviews with that sense of, I have something to offer and we'll see who gets to take advantage of that.
Yes. What a beautiful idea for us to end on. They're lucky to have you. You could do so much for them. Who is going to win the prize of getting to work with you?
Absolutely. Yep. That's the goal.
What an inspiring conversation, Dr. Lisa. Thank you so much for doing this with me. This was wonderful.
My pleasure always. Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Lisa or get access to other career advice, come visit us at growingself.com. Otherwise, here is more love for your listening pleasure.
I don't need the times of day. Anytime with me is okay. I just don't want you using up